Hello, I'm Michael Price's avatar. He's currently helping clients manage their GSA and VA contracts, and he reads every comment you leave. Welcome, I'm Michael Price, your host.
Today is June 14th, and I'm Nancy, your co-host.
You have the capital, you have the contractor, and you have the demand, right? But to sign a single piece of paper just to break ground, you have to wait 3 years for a bureaucrat, 2,000 miles away in Washington, D.C., to review your file and say yes.
Which is just agonizing.
Right. And for decades, that agonizing delay has been the reality for Native American tribes trying to build basic infrastructure. It's like being stuck in the world's most complicated DMV, where you are at the very bottom of a rigid hierarchy, constantly asking for permission to just manage your own backyard.
Yeah, and it creates a massive bottleneck that actively stifles innovation. I mean, you cannot strike while the iron is hot in any market, whether it's energy, agriculture, tech, whatever. You can't do it if your business agreements require a federal agency stamp of approval for every single individual move.
Exactly. But today, that entire system is being dismantled. We're looking at a landscape where communities aren't just, skipping the DMV line. They are tearing down the building, setting up their own regulatory frameworks, and essentially becoming their own federal counter.
Yeah, it's a huge shift.
It really is. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to examine a stack of breaking news updates and reports from Tribal Business News, specifically from the 13th of June, 2026. We are going to use these to understand a massive paradigm shift in Native American economic development, federal contracting, and tribal sovereignty.
And, it is really worth noting that our source material today comes from a platform that is entirely dedicated to Native industry intelligence.
Yeah, and it's so specialized.
Right, they cover all the nuances of finance, energy, gaming, healthcare across Indian country, and getting access to this kind of specialized, really on-the-ground reporting requires a $10 monthly subscription. But that goes to support Native journalism, and it uncovers economic trends that broader financial news outlets they completely miss them.
It is a phenomenal resource, honestly. And the trends they are tracking, they represent billions of dollars in economic activity. So for you listening right now, we are going to trace how capital and authority are flowing in these unprecedented ways. So we're going to start in DC, move to the funding pathways, and then look at what's happening on the ground. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with a headline that is sending absolute ripples through the federal contracting world.
Yeah, we are looking at a fundamental rewiring of the U.S. Small Business Administration, the SBA, and specifically its 8 Business Development Program.
Right, and for those who might just know the acronym, the ADA program is a 9-year business assistance program. It's designed for socially and economically disadvantaged firms, and it is a massive gateway to lucrative federal contracts.
Huge gateway, yeah.
So the breaking news here is that the SBA has proposed new eligibility standards. Basically, they are eliminating the race-based presumptions of social disadvantage for individually owned businesses. Now, before we go further, I have to point out that the elimination of race-based presumptions for individual business owners is obviously a massive, heavily debated political flashpoint right now across the country.
Oh, absolutely. But it is crucial to state up front that we are not taking any political sides on this issue today. None at all. We are impartially reporting the SBA's proposed changes exactly as outlined in the source material just to convey the facts of the policy shift. We are mapping the policy mechanics, not endorsing a political viewpoint.
Right. We're just strictly looking at the mechanical blueprint to see how the capital flows and how it impacts sovereign entities. Because, the most striking part of this SBA rule change is the exception. While the criteria for individuals are changing drastically, the rule preserves and leaves completely unchanged the eligibility standards for tribally owned enterprises, Alaska Native Corporations or ANCs, Native Hawaiian organizations, and community development corporations.
Which is such a massive carve-out.
It is. And I was trying to wrap my head around how the federal government justifies completely changing the rules for one group while leaving the other untouched. And the best way I can visualize it is by looking at corporate versus personal taxes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, think about a VIP lane at a major event. If an individual applies for certain government assistance or a VIP pass, they are audited on their personal individual circumstances. But the government views a tribe not as an individual minority business owner, but essentially as a sovereign holding company for an entire nation. So the legacy VIP passes for that sovereign family remain intact because its revenues don't enrich one person. They support thousands of citizen shareholders through, schools, roads, healthcare.
What's fascinating here is that the analogy holds up perfectly in federal Indian law.
Really?
Yeah, because the relationship between the federal government and a federally recognized tribe is not based on race. It's a political government-to-government relationship. It is rooted in centuries of treaties, the U.S. Constitution, and the federal trust responsibility. So when the government contracts with a tribally owned enterprise or an ANC, it is legally operating entity to entity.
Which totally explains why the Department of Defense just officially stepped into the arena. The DoD released a statement explicitly reaffirming its support for tribal and ANC participation in the ANCS program, despite all the broader turbulence happening over at the SBA.
Well, you have to consider the scale at which the Department of Defense operates, right? I mean, they are one of the largest purchasers of goods and services on the planet.
For sure.
They procure everything from advanced software and aerospace engineering to base logistics and construction. The DoD does not like volatility. They need reliable supply chains and massive scale.
And a tribal enterprise that has been operating for decades, scaling up its infrastructure, well, that provides exactly that kind of stability.
Exactly. By reaffirming their support, the DoD is essentially dropping a massive anchor into the market. They are signaling to prime contractors, to banks, and to the tribes themselves that native contracting is a secure, permanent fixture of their procurement strategy. It really acts as an anchor of stability. It allows these enterprises to confidently invest in long-term infrastructure.
Yeah, but securing federal contracts requires you to have the capacity to actually provide those goods and services, right? So what if a tribe is just starting to build its economic engine and needs the capital to build that infrastructure from scratch? Well, that brings us to a massive shift in how grant money is actually reaching these communities.
Which directly mirrors what we're seeing with the SBA.
Yeah. The tribal business news sources highlighted two massive new avenues of federal funding. First, Congress expanded eligibility last year to allow federally recognized tribes to apply directly for up to $15 million in grants through a federal outdoor recreation program. And second, the USDA has opened a $60 million funding round specifically for meat processing aimed at tribes and small processors.
The operative word in both of those updates is directly.
Right.
Historically, a lot of federal funding earmarked for tribal lands didn't go directly from Washington to the tribe. The state government acted as a pass-through entity.
Which sounds like a nightmare.
It was. A tribe had to lobby a state agency just to get a piece of a federal grant, which subjected them to state-level political priorities and massive administrative delays.
Okay, I get that cutting out the state middleman sounds great on paper, and it obviously respects sovereignty. But wait. If these are federal outdoor recreation programs, why did Congress need to pass a law just to give tribes direct access? Weren't they already part of the system?
You'd think so, but no, the system was originally built around states, removing those middlemen and giving tribes direct access to $15 million in recreation grants or $60 million in USDA meat processing funds is a massive leap. It's acknowledging tribal sovereignty and empowering local economic control directly without asking a state for permission.
Yeah. But I have to push back a little on the logistics here. Doesn't that put an enormous administrative burden on a small tribe? I mean, suddenly they have to handle the federal compliance, the auditing, the grant reporting that a massive state agency used to do. Are all these communities actually equipped for that level of federal bureaucracy?
That is the exact growing pain many tribes are navigating right now, but it's a necessary one. I mean, you build capacity by exercising it.
Fair point.
Since the 1970s, under the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, which is often called 638 contracting, tribes have been taking over the management of federal programs like health clinics and forestry. They have spent decades building up really sophisticated internal, legal, and accounting departments.
Oh, I see.
So when a $60 million USDA grant opens up, many tribes already have the institutional muscle to manage the compliance. They are trading state-level paternalism for direct federal accountability, which they are more than prepared to handle.
Wow. And the impact of having direct control over that capital is wild when you look at the specific industries. Like $60 million for meat processing?
Yeah.
We all remember the supply chain shocks a few years ago.
Oh yeah, vividly.
A few massive processing plants went offline, and suddenly grocery store shelves were empty, and ranchers had livestock they literally couldn't sell.
Right? And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the essence of food sovereignty. True sovereignty isn't just a legal argument in a courtroom, you know? It is a physical reality. It is the ability to feed your own people. By funding tribal meat processing facilities directly, you are breaking the reliance on multinational conglomerates whose processing plants might be 3 states away.
You bring it all in-house.
Exactly. You localize the jobs, you localize the food supply, and you physically insulate the community from global supply chain shocks.
It provides total economic insulation. And you see the same logic in the $15 million outdoor recreation grants. Outdoor recreation is a multi-billion-dollar industry. But historically, if a state park borders a reservation, the state dictates the foot traffic, captures the tourist revenue, and sets the environmental policy.
Right, the tribe gets bypassed.
Yeah, but if a tribe can directly access federal capital to build their own trails, visitor centers, or guide services, they dictate the terms. They monetize the land, but they also protect it according to their own cultural and environmental standards.
They own the entire life cycle of the industry on their land, rather than just being bystanders to it. It builds real self-reliance.
Totally. But having the capital or having the regulatory green light from the DoD is just the fuel, right? Execution is the actual engine. The policy might look great on paper in DC, but what happens when tribes actually put this into practice on the ground? And more importantly, what happens when external forces try to stop them?
Well, sovereignty that you cannot physically build or legally defend, it's just theoretical. And what we are seeing in the source material is the aggressive transition from theory to practice.
Yeah, our sources give us a really detailed look at how this is playing out. Let's look at the infrastructure execution first. Out in California, the Karuk tribe just secured $1.5 million in federal funding to build workforce housing specifically for healthcare professionals.
Such a targeted use of funds.
Right. And over in Colorado, the Southern Ute tribe has gained expanded energy authority under the first ever Terra agreement. And then on the legal front, 24 groups, including native nonprofits, are locked in a massive lawsuit over those canceled USDA grants we were just talking about. Plus, a federal judge just ruled that a lawsuit brought by the Ho-Chunk Nation against Calchi sports markets can proceed.
It spans across housing, energy, agriculture, and high-stakes financial litigation. It is totally comprehensive.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. When I look at the Karuk housing and the Southern Ute energy agreement, I don't just see a random assortment of local news. I see a community building a parallel, self-sustaining economic ecosystem.
How do you mean?
It's like building a fortress. The Karuk tribe realizes you cannot have a thriving sovereign economy if you can't attract doctors to your rural health clinics because there's literally nowhere for them to live. The housing market is the bottleneck for human capital. So you build the infrastructure to keep your people healthy. You use the federal funding to build the housing yourself, secure the talent, and your workforce stays healthy.
Yeah, you are solving the foundational layer of economic development, human health.
Exactly. And then you need to power that ecosystem. Which brings us to the Southern Ute tribe and the Terra agreement. Let's unpack the mechanics of this, because it directly answers that waiting 3 years for a signature problem we talked about at the top of the show.
Yeah, Terra stands for a Tribal Energy Resource Agreement. Before a Terra, if a tribe wanted to lease their land for, say, a solar farm or drill for natural gas or build a wind turbine, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the BIA, had to approve every single lease, every single business agreement, and every single right-of-way.
Which introduces an agonizing amount of bureaucratic friction.
Unbearable friction. If a green energy tech company wants to build a wind farm and they have the choice between private land where they can sign and reel in a week or tribal land where it will take 3 years of environmental reviews and federal approvals, they go to the private land.
Obviously.
Right. And the tribe loses the economic opportunity entirely. But a Terra changes the game. The tribe and the Department of the Interior negotiate a comprehensive, overarching regulatory framework. Once that single framework is approved, the tribe basically steps into the shoes of the federal government. They can approve their own energy leases and business agreements directly without needing federal sign-off for each individual project.
The Southern Ute gaining this expanded authority is a historic leveling of the playing field. They have the agility to move at the speed of the modern energy market now. But building this infrastructure and energy ecosystem is only half the battle, because you also have to build a legal moat to defend it from encroachment.
Absolutely.
And that is exactly what these two major lawsuits represent. Let's look at the USDA grant lawsuit. The federal government offered a program, native groups and nonprofits applied, and they were awarded funds to support their agricultural operations, but then funds were frozen or canceled. Why? Because outside groups filed reverse discrimination lawsuits against the federal government, essentially arguing that grants were exclusionary, and a judge slapped an injunction on the money.
And, for a long time, the reaction to something like that might have been resignation. The money got tied up in DC politics, so the local project just dies. But not anymore. These 24 Native groups aren't just walking away. They have organized and are aggressively fighting back in federal court. They are arguing that they operated in good faith, they signed contracts, and they have a legal right to this capital. They are holding the federal system accountable for the commitments it made.
It is a remarkable shift from playing defense to playing offense. And the Ho-Chunk Nation lawsuit against Calchi Sports Markets is, well, it's an even more complex example of playing offense. Calchi is a financial exchange monitored by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. They allow people to trade on the outcome of real-world events like congressional elections, weather patterns, and potentially sports-related outcomes.
Right? And this raises an important question. How do you regulate a tech platform that gamifies real-world events when it borders on sports betting?
That is the exact threat because the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, or IGRA, provides the legal framework for tribal casinos, which are the primary economic engines for many tribes, including the Ho-Chunk. These gaming compacts are painstakingly negotiated with states. But if a Silicon Valley tech platform can offer event contracts that basically mimic sports betting directly to consumers' phones, bypassing the state and tribal regulatory frameworks entirely, it threatens the brick-and-mortar revenue that funds the tribe's housing, healthcare, and education.
Yeah, the Ho-Chunk Nation recognizes that tech encroachment is a direct threat to their sovereign jurisdiction and their economic foundation. By securing a federal judge's approval to proceed with this lawsuit, they are forcing the federal courts to define exactly where a tech platform's reach ends and a sovereign nation's gaming rights begin.
It requires an incredible amount of sophistication to fight these battles. I mean, you need specialized legal teams who understand the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, federal Indian law, and tech regulation all simultaneously. It proves that tribal enterprises have built the internal capacity to navigate the highest, most convoluted levels of the federal court system.
Yeah, they really have.
So, what does this all mean? For you listening, whether you are an entrepreneur looking for market stability, a policy analyst, or just someone trying to understand where the American economy is heading, why should you care about the SBA 8 exemptions or a TARA agreement in Colorado?
It's a great question.
You should care because you are witnessing a masterclass in how communities engineer true, lasting economic resilience. We live in an era where global supply chains are incredibly fragile, where federal priorities flip-flop with every single election cycle, and where local communities often feel entirely at the mercy of massive, distant bureaucratic force.
Yeah, just helpless.
But by taking direct control of their human capital through healthcare housing, by securing their own energy grids, by localizing their agricultural processing, and by fearlessly litigating to defend their market share against tech platforms, these tribes are creating a blueprint for self-reliance. They're proving that sovereignty isn't a historical artifact. It is the most effective tool for modern economic survival. And frankly, it's a blueprint that any local municipality or government could study and learn from.
It truly is. And, it leaves me with a final lingering thought.
Yeah.
We are watching a massive influx of direct federal capital, this newfound regulatory agility and energy, and an intense legal assertiveness. Right now, much of this effort is focused inward, building up the tribe's own internal capacity, their own housing, their own food supply. But given the speed and sophistication with which they are acquiring capital and authority, could we soon see a tipping point?
What do you mean by a tipping point?
Well, could tribal enterprises evolve beyond just supporting their own citizens to actually becoming the primary economic anchors, the primary food suppliers, and the dominant utility providers for entire surrounding states and regions?
Wow, that completely inverts the historical power dynamic. Instead of the tribe relying on the state infrastructure, the state ends up relying on the tribe's grid and supply chain. The people standing in that DMV queue won't be the tribes asking for permission. It will be outside corporations and state agencies asking to do business inside the native economic ecosystem.
Exactly. The center of economic gravity is shifting, and it is shifting permanently.
That is an incredible thought to end on, and a perfect encapsulation of why these updates matter so much. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you a new lens to view the news, a deeper understanding of the mechanics of sovereignty, and maybe a little inspiration for how resilience is built from the ground up. Until next time, keep asking questions, and we'll see you on the next deep
A
dive.
special thank you to MarketUS.com for furnishing us this information. You can reach them at MarketUS.com or call them at 954-636-3232. Before we go, this deep dive was created by the MarketUS.com team. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. It's right below the subscribe link.